How can yoga as a practice help us overcome grief, trauma, anxiety, depression?
Most people don't even know to breathe correctly. Sometimes they're breathing through their mouths.
Yeah.
They're sleeping, snoring, mouth breathing perpetually.
Yeah.
Right? You see a lot of people are doing reverse or paradoxical breathing.
Emotional blockages, all of it which we are seeing in most of the people today.
One of the most important texts on yoga and karma yoga is Bhagavad Gita.
What role does yoga play in improving our gut health, say liver health, hormonal health?
Physical goods, but also even emotions, thoughts, which when they are hoarded, they just try and find a place in your body and then they show up in the form of.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of That Healing Feeling with me, Neha Ranglani. And if you are somebody who loves yoga or wants to know more about yoga in depth, then this episode is for you, because today I'm talking to a guest who is a yoga expert. And we are not just talking about asanas or pranayam, but we are going into the depths of yoga and understanding yoga as a philosophy and way of life. Joining me today is Nishtha Bijlani, a Mumbai-based yoga teacher and a Nike Well Collective trainer. Nishtha was once a media professional but followed her calling to yoga, and now she blends Hatha, Iyengar, Ashtanga in her teachings, conducts global classes and niche retreats. She's also very passionate about building a yoga community because she believes in growing together. Let's pick her brain today for some yoga gyan. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that we can share some more amazing health and healing insights with you. And also subscribe to Neha Ranglani Shorts, where we add short clips of this episode so that you can learn a lot of things in just a few minutes. Hi Nishtha. Welcome to my podcast, That Healing Feeling. And today I'm so happy to have you because you're a friend. You've been my yoga teacher for like many, many years now. And today you are also a guest on my podcast. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm more than happy to be here. Couldn't be happier to be here on your podcast.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to have some great conversation about yoga because I've always done yoga with you, practiced yoga on the mat and understood yoga through your perspective in our retreats. But today I want to go into depth of yoga. So I want to know, Nishtha, what is yoga beyond exercise? Because when you talk about yoga, most people look at yoga as a physical exercise form of an activity or, something that you're doing for your physical body. But you've always mentioned this, that yoga is not only a physical form of workout or activity, it's beyond that. So please tell me, what is yoga?
So simply put, I would say that yoga is a path or a tool for self-discovery, to know more about yourself, to be on that path of self-actualization. So very simply put, it is just a journey that takes you inward to know and discover and unravel, deeper truths about yourself. While we obviously see today that, when you look at images anywhere on the internet, the first thing you see is the practice on the mat. While that very much is the practice of yoga, yes, the asana practice, but that is not the only aspect of yoga. The reason we give it so much importance is because it's tangible. It's something that you can do. You can touch, feel, it's a gross body level aspect of yoga. While that may be a very helpful limb, I may say, in today's times, which allows people to kind of enter the world of yoga. But I would say any person who spends enough time will at least have one question in their mind: what more beyond this? If they spend enough time genuinely, sincerely practicing, even if it's just asanas, there will be a time when they will question, what more can I do? How can I go deeper into this subject? And that question is the best thing that can happen to them, because that's when they begin the journey of self-discovery.
So you spoke about asanas, but I want to know what in totality yoga comprises of.
Right. So, like I said, asanas is just one aspect. If we look at the Patanjali Sutras, it is one of the texts. I wouldn't say the only text, but one of the texts of, that we refer today in modern times, written by Maharishi Patanjali, who's given due credit for bringing a lot of, understanding and importance to the world of yoga. So in his text, if you're just looking at the limbs of yoga, or Ashtanga yoga is what he talks about. Today, in fact, we'll probably get to it later as well, because Ashtanga yoga, when we use this term, people may understand it differently. There are those who understand Ashtanga yoga just as the physical practice, and there's those who understand Ashtanga yoga in the entirety of it, which are the 8 limbs. So I'm going to speak first about the 8 limbs of yoga. So starting first with the yamas, the niyamas. Those are the first 2 limbs that we enter yoga with, or rather something that you can keep going back to, which are your codes of conduct or the principles or the value system that, which upholds yoga. So that would be the yama niyamas. Third would be asan. So asan comes only at the 3rd level.
Okay.
But can you imagine the importance that is given to it? So
Yeah.
it only comes at the 3rd level. So we work on the physical body. 4th comes pranayam, where you start getting a bit subtler. You work with the breath. Then comes the 5th one, which is pratyahar. So pratyahar is that bridge between the first 4 and the remaining. So pratyahara is basically where you are moving into that step of yoga where you're withdrawing inward from the external to the internal world. After that comes dharana. Dharana, which is one-pointedness or creating a sense of focus, setting your intention with a fiery gaze, for example, or just having that willpower determination. Then comes dhyana. Once you have inculcated that one-pointedness, that's when you can step into or tap into the state of dhyan or meditation.
Okay.
And then comes the 8th limb, which is samadhi. Samadhi is when you have, moved through these steps or worked through your sadhana, worked through your practice to probably work or reach, or, it may take lifetimes for that matter.
Yeah.
But move towards the path of enlightenment. So the end goal ends up being samadhi, which may probably be actualized in this lifetime or lifetimes to come. But the journey of a yogi begins once they have started. Yeah.
So you spoke about yamas, niyamas. I want to know what are those principles, because all we do is focus on asanas, and we focus on how the asanas are helping us get more flexible, get more agile and things like that. But what are the principles that we need to know about before we get to the asana bit?
So when we look at yamas and niyamas, we look at them as set of principles or guidelines or codes of conduct. First, which end up being the way in which we interact with the society. That would be the yamas. And the niyamas would be, guidelines more towards self. So if I speak about, say, yamas, the first one ends up being ahimsa. So which we understand as non-violence. Non-violence, not just in a very literal manner of violence, but even towards self, through speech, through thought, through actions. So that's when we look at ahimsa at all of these levels. Then we look at asteya. Asteya, which means non-stealing. When we speak of non-stealing, it's again not just the very obvious stealing of goods, physical goods, etc. Even when it comes to something like plagiarism, taking credit or taking credit where it's not yours. So even that aspect is covered when you look at non-stealing. And that's something so rampant, right? We don't even realize when it's, you've made something yours which wasn't to begin with. So that would be asteya. Then comes satya. We look at truthfulness. Again, honesty, truthfulness at every aspect. Not only the very obvious, but in the way you conduct it with yourself. Are you being honest with yourself? So it's always in relation to the outside and the inside. Then we look at aparigraha. Aparigraha is non-hoarding. Again, that we see around us, especially in the modern world, right? Like sometimes we say, I'm a collector. Like today, it's cool to be a collector of shoes, of bags and things like that. But at the end of it, it is something that you're hoarding, that which you don't actually need, actually which isn't even being used to that great extent. So physical goods, but also even emotions, thoughts, which when they are hoarded, they just try and find a place in your body, and then they show up in the form of illnesses, disease, etc. So we understand the psychosomatic effect of it as well. So aparigraha even concerns your thoughts, your emotions, the feelings, the past, grudges, resentment, anger that we may be holding on to. So that would be aparigraha. And the last is brahmacharya. Now this one, very interestingly, because brahmacharya is looked at as celibacy.
Yeah.
But that's a very limited way of looking at it. Not that it is not covering or talking about somebody who is choosing to be celibate, but actually brahmacharya here in this context is spoken from the point of view of not being overindulgent.
Okay.
So it is not just, related to intimacy or, the sexual aspect of wanting to be celibate or withdrawing from it. It actually applies to anything and everything that can make a person get to a point of, say, addictive behavior or obsessive behavior, any kind of overindulgence. So that is what brahmacharya covers, other than just looking at it as celibacy.
Okay. But brahmacharya also covers obsession of food?
Everything.
Obsession of anything,
overindulgence,
not
of
just
any
sexual
kind.
bit.
Correct.
Okay.
Anything that gives rise to greed, which is making you consume in any way,
Yeah.
whether it is watching something, whether it is, consuming through any of your senses, anything that is overindulgent would come in the category of, going against brahmacharya.
That's so
basically.
interesting because you always see it from a very limited perspective.
Yeah.
Celibacy is always, like brahmacharya is always seen as celibacy and from the sexual perspective, but never this. Like, this is an eye-opener for me as well.
Yeah.
What about niyamas?
The first one is Soch. So if you see, a lot of this ends up being more about personal codes of conduct, personal ways of leading your life. So Soch is cleanliness. Again, cleanliness at a physical level, sure, but even at the level of the mind, thoughts, emotions, even your habits and choices, everything that can contribute to cleaner choices, hygiene of the mind, hygiene of the emotions. So you're looking at Soch from all of these aspects. Then we look at Santosh, which is contentment. So one thing is we talk about happiness, but here we're talking about contentment, which is even deeper. We're talking about something which is no matter what your choice is, no matter what life throws at you, to probably question and check, am I still able to feel content towards it? So it's a little deeper reflective state of being when we talk of Santosh, beyond just happy, unhappy.
Okay.
Right? And then we have tapas. So tapas, I think we've heard in different contexts because again, Hindi, Sanskrit lingos may have come about. So tapas, tapasya, it comes from that. So it is you putting yourself through a process of sadhana, through a process of discipline or routine in order to kind of achieve your goals or in order to be determined on your yogic journey, on your path. So that is your tapas, which is required. You very much requires. Tapas also comes from the fire element. So it's like you're putting yourself, it's like, coal needs to go under the process of firing for it to emerge as a diamond. So when we talk about tapas in the yogic context, it's very much spoken in this, that you're going through the grind so that you kind of rise from the ashes, Then you look at swadhyay, which is self-study, self-reflection. As I said in the beginning, yoga, if you approach it as anything, sure, but the best way to look at it is as a journey of self-exploration or self-study. So the process of constantly unlearning, relearning, knowing more about yourself. Like it said, knowledge is power. So when you educate yourself more about your truest being, that is when you are kind of removing layers of ignorance. And that is the path of yoga. And then we talk about the last niyam, which is Ishwar Pranidhan. So like I said, niyam is more about, the yogi's journey, the person's journey. So at the end of it all, you had your Soch, Santosh, you're doing your tapas, swadhyay, etc. At the end of it all, then you surrender. So Ishwar Pranidhan is surrendering to the universe's ways or the divine or the God's will, whatever you may call it. So Ishwar Pranidhan, just do your bit and then let it be. And let God, for example.
Yeah, like we always hear in Bhagavad Gita.
Correct.
Krishna says, Karam kar, phal ki ichha mat kar.
Absolutely.
So do your bit and just leave it to God.
One of the most important texts on yoga and karma yoga is Bhagavad Gita. And so this aspect is very well highlighted in that as well.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Really, I think that gave me so much perspective about the yogic principles. I never knew about these things.
Yeah.
Just like anyone else, I also only knew about asanas, pranayams, meditation, but didn't know the entire.
To the eyes, right? So,
yes. Mm-hmm. Now coming back to the forms of yoga, there are so many forms of yoga. There's Ashtanga, Hatha, Iyengar, Vinyasa, and these names are like, to a great extent, I think they're also very overlapping. But are these forms completely different, or are they like a mix of all practices? And how do you choose what's right for you? Because, you hear someone saying, oh, I do Hatha, oh, I do Vinyasa, I do Iyengar. And then for someone who's a complete beginner in yoga, will not know where they have to go and what they have to choose.
Right. So all these names that you've taken today may be called, for the lack of better word, may be called a style of yoga asana practice. But again, it in fact takes time for people to make that distinction that yoga and yoga asana, they're not like, when we say yoga, we just limit it to the asana understanding. But actually, if you ask me from a traditional point of view, when we say various parts of yoga, so there's, the yoga darshanas, the 4 parts of yoga, which are, say, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raj Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So they're the 4 parts. Actually, traditionally, those are the 4 divisions that are made, 4 pillars or 4 darshanas that we talk about yoga. Now, when we say Ashtang Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Iyengar Yoga, they are actually just modern adaptations of the style of physical practice that one may choose or not. So the reason I'm putting this out is because, the question that you asked me about which one does a person choose, they're simply choosing the form of physical practice.
Yeah.
So it is not actually the style of yoga or form of yoga, because we have to understand yoga is a bigger umbrella under which asana is just one aspect. And in this one aspect, there are various styles that have come about in the modern time that a person chooses to practice.
Yeah.
So if I just speak about that right now, if you look at it this way, all your physical practice is actually Hatha Yoga. Yeah, but now people look at Hatha Yoga differently and they call Ashtang Yoga different, etc. But at the end of it, no matter what, whether it is Iyengar Yoga, wherein Shri B.K.S. Iyengar, who is no more but one of the great masters of yoga of the modern world, he contributed to the asana world in such a way that he introduced props. He created props which help with alignment, with so many healing, aspects of the physical practice. So hence, after his name, it came about as Iyengar Yoga. Not that this has traditionally existed. It is very modern, actually, if you see. Then when you look at Ashtang, earlier I spoke about Ashtang Yoga, Ashtang, which are 8 limbs. But in this context, what you're asking me is the Ashtang Vinyasa, which once again, similar to how we had B.K. Iyengar, who came and introduced Iyengar Yoga or his form of yoga, there was Pattabhi Jois, who again has contributed in the modern world of yoga. So with his practice of vinyasa, which are a sequence of asanas practiced together, and there are multiple series that he has created that one today practice and is very popular globally. Today Ashtanga Vinyasa ends up being one of the most popular ones globally that people practice because it ends up being very physically challenging. Now then, Hatha Yoga is looked at as maybe just the slightly boring classical form of yoga, but actually everything that we do physically is Hatha Yoga. From Hatha Yoga, they all have branched out because the postures remain the same. What ends up being different is the way they are taught. The way they are taught, the way they are practiced. With the breath method, which might be different, the counts that may be different. So that only ends up being the difference. And as a result, the practitioner gets certain different benefits of that very practice. Just because the approach is different. At the end of it all, physical practice is Hatha Yoga.
Okay. And Hatha Yoga is just practicing the asanas, basically.
Yeah, any practice of asana or physical practice, whether it's asanas, whether when you do kriyas. And Hatha Yoga also, if you see, like when we talk about the time of Patanjali or when yogic texts were created, back in the day, physical practice wasn't given so much importance. It was always Raj Yoga, where you're working with meditation, working with the mind, overcoming your thoughts and gaining power over your mind. Later in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the focus started shifting more towards the physical practice, and Hatha Yoga was introduced at that time only so that, because the yogis at that time realized that we need to control the monkey-mindedness. So it wasn't easy for the human at that time, evolving in the way it was, that we needed to gain power over our mind, but that had to be done through the body. And hence Hatha Yoga was created, and the principles of Hatha Yoga were created. And so what we are following are more or less certain principles of Hatha Yoga, and asana ends up being a branch of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Earlier, if you look at the Patanjali text, the reference of asana only means to take a seat. All these 62 lakh asanas, or how many ever lakh asanas that people talk about today, the number keeps varying. One, a person cannot do that even in their lifetime. Two, you don't need it all. It's only at the end of it, even your asana practice, the goal ends up being to lead you towards meditation, to lead you towards a subtler state of being. At the end of it, to win over your mind, which takes over you. So not letting your mind win over you, using your body from gross moving to subtle. Okay. That is at the end of it all, your practice of Hatha Yoga.
So does that also mean when we say yoga is a way of life and what you are on the mat is how you show up in your day-to-day life, does that what it really means?
Yeah. So if you look at the asana practice, see at the end of it, the practices of yoga are leading you to one direction. So I usually say this in my class, when you step on your mat is going to behave like a mirror of your life and the way you approach life. So if you see, like as a teacher, my observations in class have been such where sometimes I see a student looking at the fellow student, so and so can do this posture, so I must be able to. Yeah. So that sense of competitiveness comes in. Or the other student looks at, say, somebody who can do it really well. Oh my God, this is not for me. can feel intimidated. But where is that coming from? That is just a reflection of how you're living your life. Are you forcing through a practice? Are you being too laid back and lazy? Are you able to be consistent? All of these little aspects simply come about from how you live your life. So a person I see as a very typical type A personality will push through even when I have to tell them, take it easy, respect your body, accept if it's not happening today, it's all right. It's a process, it's a journey. But that inner competitiveness of that student does not allow them to. They may eventually learn. So all of these reflections show up as lessons that can be learned or habits that can be changed even on the mat. Once you're able to see, this is happening.
Yeah.
So you realize that if you can change it on the mat, you can probably take it back with you beyond the mat as well.
That's what it means. And that's how you show up in the world, to be more grounded in yourself and not bother about what's happening around you, or not compare yourself too much to people around you. Is that what it means?
Yeah, totally. So it helps you to understand how you are in that moment, in your practice, at the same time, how you are affected by your external surrounding as well.
Okay.
Because yoga, in its truest sense, is it's not competitive, right? The last thing it would be competitive. But certain things like this, whether being competitive, whether being laid back, whether giving up, just because you see someone doing better, all of these small personality traits start to show up in a person's practice. So if they're identified and you're aware of that at that time, that's something you can reflect on. That's something you can probably think about, ponder over, and realize that, hey, that's how I probably live my life too. Through my work, in my family, in my interactions. So if I can identify that here, I can be kinder to myself.
And then that's how I will...
Correct. And that's how you'll probably move about even in your life. So it's such a beautiful process of learning about yourself, because yoga is the process of learning, knowing so much more about yourself, dropping and shedding layers to be able to see the bare truth. So whether it is through asana practice or whichever other limb or whichever other, practice that we choose, it is only taking you to see yourself more truthfully.
Okay. Amazing. Wow. So much to learn about yourself from yoga principles, and how limited perspective do we have about it. It's really surprising. People need to know more about this. So moving on to the next limb of yoga, which is pranayam, which is so important. Breath is such an important aspect of our being. And I think that's the only aspect we can manipulate for our benefit. What is pranayam and what are the right ways to do it?
Yeah. So pranayam, one of my favorite practices, but I have to share that when I started my yoga journey, now it's been about 10 years, back then, for me, again, the inclination was always the physical practice. And even though in theory I knew that pranayam and meditation must be practiced more consistently and regularly, it took me years to be able to, actually get to the level of practice so that I could actually benefit gain the experience of it. So the value of it and, to actually benefit from it, that came to me a lot later. And the reason being, you have to get so comfortable at the level of gross body to be able to tap into subtle. Because the subtle layer is such that you can't catch, you can't feel it with your hand, you can't hold it. Whereas with the body, you can dictate, right? Turn, bend, etc. So it's easier to function at the gross level. Now, when we talk about pranayam, again, if I have to even just give you a very brief understanding of what pranayam is, if I just speak of the term, mostly people just look at it as breathing exercise.
Yeah.
While it is not wrong to say that it is a breathing exercise, but it is just one way of looking at it. It's a very limited way of looking at it. So to break down the two words for you, prana and ayam. Prana means the life force or vital energy, and ayam comes from the word vyayam. While that's why people call it exercise, but actually means to elongate the prana in you. So it means the process of elongation or lengthen or extend.
Okay.
So as an overall meaning, it means to elongate the prana in you. So to lengthen the life force within you or the vital energy within you, that is the process of pranayam. Now, when I put this out in front of you, and when you then practice knowing this, you won't only be able to practice it as a breathing exercise. Because every breath, now people think prana is breath, but prana is not breath. Prana is available to us through various mediums, and breath ends up being one of the carriers and one of the mediums of prana. So breath ends up being one of the very important ways in which we intake prana. Hence, when you understand that, again, when you are sitting with your breath, you'll realize that through every exchange of breath, you are raising in energy, you're raising yourself in prana and the value of prana or the content of prana. So that changes the relationship with your breath.
Okay.
Then we're not simply doing it as a mechanical breathing exercise. Okay, 7 counts, 10 counts, whatever of Anulom Vilom, of Kapalbhati or whatever it is. Then you start to understand that this subtle force cannot be controlled. It has to be allowed. Because it's so subtle, your gross body has to be the best foundation it can be. It has to be the vessel, the container, which is going to allow the natural flow of breath to take place. That process of allowing, just that shift, I am not making the breath happen, whereas I am staying, the breath is flowing. And I'm then being the observer of my breath, or I'm allowing the breath to, channelize itself through me, allowing the prana to work through me. When you start looking at pranayam that way, it changes the game. So yes, we do have pranayam practices which can have physical benefits. But if you ask me, it's said that, the monkey-mindedness. I was speaking about Hatha Yoga earlier. So to overcome the monkey-mindedness, you need the body. But at the same time, if there's only one thing that can have mastery over the mind, it's the breath. It's the breath that you can be in power of, which allows you to have mastery over your thoughts and over your mind. So hence, pranayam also, to get into the practice, it's a journey. There's something called journey to pranayam that I teach amongst my students. And that's the reason I call it journey, because you have to get to it.
Yeah.
You can't just,
Jump
reach on
into
day
it.
one and
Yeah.
go like, I have mastered this. You have to slowly, because it's so subtle, the process of just allowing, that is something we have to drop, because we are so driven to make something happen. Here you have to sit back and allow it to happen. So pranayam, if you ask me, teaches you just that. And if you were to ask me which pranayam, what pranayam, techniques, number of counts, I would say, if you are starting off, forget the counts, forget the techniques. Sure, you'll learn the technique, but then you'll end up keeping the practice very mechanical. But the process of pranayam is to go beyond that. So if you're even just starting off with pranayam, the best way to look at it as breath awareness. If you simply just get comfortable with breath, most people don't even know to breathe correctly. Sometimes they're breathing through their mouth.
Yeah.
They're sleeping, snoring, mouth breathing perpetually.
Yeah.
Right? You see a lot of people are doing reverse or paradoxical breathing. So when we have a natural process of breathing where a person inhales, the diaphragm moves up in order to kind of give you an expansion in the belly. And when you exhale, in the process of contraction, you feel that the belly is going inward. It's the movement of the diaphragm that causes that. A baby that's born, naturally, if you see a small newborn baby, you will see the belly is always rising and falling because the diaphragm knows exactly what to do. But today, due to the modern lifestyle, our posture, the way we sit, we have completely lost connection with this aspect of our body. And hence the diaphragm may not efficiently be working. It's a very important muscle in the respiratory system. And as a result, people are not doing the natural breathing process or diaphragmatic breath.
Right.
And they're simply breathing ulta, reverse or paradoxical breathing. Whereas inhale ho raha hai and the stomach goes in, and exhale ho raha hai and the belly is coming out.
Oh.
Or when you would ask a person deep breath and they'll be like, sucking the breath in, feeling ki ye meri deep breath hai and this is how I must breathe fully. Actually, there should be no sound to your breath.
And no force also.
No
right?
force. Yeah. So learning how to breathe is what I would say is the first step to pranayam.
Okay.
Correcting these modern day conditionings that have taken over us due to lifestyle and various factors, that is the first step. Find out how you're breathing, and if it's not correct, change that. Mouth breathing ho raha hai, so learn to breathe through the nose. If your nasal passages are blocked, there are kriyas that we do.
Yeah.
Jal neti, nasya, etc. Working through them to free open your nasal passage so at least you can breathe. Most people are breathing through one nostril.
Yeah.
How do you get to pranayam? It's such an advanced practice. It's such an intermediate practice. How does a person function and navigate the breath through two nasal passages when they are only breathing from one? And then they go into Anulom Vilom or Nadi Shodhan and they're like, my right is blocked, my left is blocked, and I'm not able to breathe. Hence, if I have to ask a person to move into the practice of pranayam, first check on the basics. Are you breathing well? Are both your nasal passages free? Slowly start with breath awareness. Can you sit just for 1 full minute, 60 seconds, with breath awareness, where you are not losing your awareness too much of the natural inhale exhale. And once you have that, for the next 1 minute, simply work with the natural breath exchange. Inhale, exhale. That is your first introduction to pranayam before you even think of going into techniques and other practices.
Wow. So, and is there a right time to do pranayam or a proper pre-post pranayam technique, or some things that you need to keep in mind, or any contraindications to pranayams?
Yeah. So while we may think pranayam is simply working with the breath, it looks very simple, it looks harmless. But let me tell you, when you're working with the subtle body, you should definitely, even gross body, but with subtle body, you won't even realize when things can become counterintuitive or counterproductive. So they should be done with the right guidance, with the right mentor. Have a qualified yoga teacher, go to the right institute, somebody who has studied and knows their thing when you are taking up pranayam. It's very easy to just find a video on YouTube, but I wouldn't suggest that to be the right way or the best way. So find a technique or something as a practice that is given to you by your teacher and keep with it. And keep checking and keep growing and tweaking your practice with guidance. So that way you know that while you may think you're just breathing, but it's not true, because we are shifting the breath. We are navigating it in a specific manner, and hence it should be done with proper guidance. Whereas best time to do is morning. There are some practices that can be done in the evening, at night, bedtime as well, like Brahmari or the humming bee breath is a very tranquilizing pranayam. So it really helps with sleep, insomnia problems. So can be done at bedtime as well. Certain practices like Kapalbhati and Bhastrika, which we look at as pranayam, but actually is a kriya first.
Okay.
So that should be done early in the morning. Again, it has too many specifications. Who should do it, who should not do it, when you should do it, and when you should not. Keeping and bearing all those things in mind. Again, which is done with the right guidance. And it may vary from person to person. Hence, it's always better to do it with guidance, so it's not generic advice for anyone.
You also spoke about kriyas, Jalneti and Nasyam. So can everyone and anyone do Jalneti? Because I've seen a lot of people find it very intimidating, like, oh my God, I don't know how to put something in my nose. What if the water gets stuck? What if it goes into my head? What if it comes? There's too much fear around Jalneti as a practice. So how can one become comfortable with that practice?
See, any practice is as useful or only useful if it is done correctly. Learning it through a video or learning it off a friend, come I'll teach you how to do it, doesn't help. Should be doing it in the right manner, in the right setup, whether it's at a yoga ashram, institute, or a healing center where they know what they're doing, they're teaching you correctly. And then if you do it correctly, it's very, very beneficial. Again, there are lots of do's, don'ts, guidelines, which season, which weather, who should do it, who should not, etc. So many of those things are taken care of if you're doing it from the right place. If you're doing it at the right place and learning the right technique, it's so very beneficial, especially in the polluted environment that we are living in. So kriyas work as a cleansing technique. It works on clearing your nasal passages. It strengthens your respiratory system. As a result, enables you to breathe better. As a result, enables you to digest better. Because if our nasal passage is free, we're breathing free. You also know, as a nutritionist, of course, that one of your senses, very important, is the sense of smell, which is contributing so greatly to the process of digestion. So various factors start to get affected as a result of it. So as it's only useful if it's done correctly.
Okay, so you wouldn't recommend anyone to pick up a YouTube video and start doing it as a beginner?
Yeah, no.
They have to do it under guidance.
Yeah. And that's when they feel intimidated, because they see a video and they see a picture and you're seeing how you're pouring water through the nose. The first thing is like, hey, no, this is like, I get students who tell me, oh my God, it's going to go to my brain, it's going to go to my ears. No, it doesn't go anywhere else but where it's supposed to come out from. So for them to not feel intimidated, it's best to be done in the right environment, guided.
And then they also have to follow it up with Nasyam.
So it depends again. Jalneti has its seasons, Nasyam has its seasons. How Nasya can be done at home at a certain level, whereas how in Ayurveda Nasya is carried out. So it all depends very person to person. Both can also be done. So there's a way in which you can do both one after the other. So it really depends on various factors. Even a person, if they have very dry nasal passage, for example, too much internal dryness, then Jalneti would be avoided because it's salt water. Okay. So that would cause further dryness. Hence, maybe only Nasya would be recommended for that person. So hence it's so person specific.
So before we head to our next segment, I want to give a big shout out to Urban Platter for being the amazing sponsors for the season 1 of That Healing Feeling with Neha Ranglani. Now moving on to a very important topic, which is mental and emotional health. And we know the kind of world we are living in today. We have so much clutter in our mind, and there's so much of clutter of thoughts, clutter of emotions. We aren't processing our emotions well. How can yoga as a practice help us overcome grief, trauma, anxiety, depression, emotional blockages, all of it which we are seeing in most of the people today?
So when a person thinks of yoga, hears about yoga, the first thing that comes to their mind is a fancy pose, because they associate yoga with a flexible body or a body that can do everything. But actually, yoga is for the mind. So we may not commonly understand this, but I'll just dive a little deeper into it. Yoga is a spiritual path. While it may be looked at as something which is aesthetically driven, but that is the misconception. Though a person tries to dive deeper into the subject, you'll realize that yoga is totally for the mind. There's a very important Yoga Sutra by Maharishi Patanjali, which is Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Now that, and it's coming in one of the first sutras. So when we try to just interpret that sutra, it speaks about yoga being that which helps to clear the fluctuations or restrain the fluctuations on the mind's plane. If I have to just break down very briefly. Now, if you imagine your mind as a lake and you throw a little pebble and you get ripples. You throw another pebble, you get ripples. Now, the ripples and that pebble are thought, and the thought that leads to a cycle of thoughts. So I'm just giving you a metaphor. And yoga is saying that the practice or what yoga is, it is to have your chitta or the lake of your mind getting freer of the fluctuations or the mental thought patterns or the thought waves. So when the text itself holds that much importance on the chitta or the mind's plane, we have a lot to learn from it. So while you may start your journey, say for example with yoga asanas, you get to a mat, you go join a studio, you practice 1 hour, sure. That's a great way, but it is a temporary way. That should also at some point lead a person to want to dive deeper and move into the process. Even the bodily practice for that matter, somewhere or the other starts positively contributing to your mental health. Because we also look at it from the point of view of psychosomatic. So when you're working with the body, the stored, held up emotions in the body as well start releasing. And that starts to have a positive effect. Sometimes you see people in class just are ecstatic or really happy, or sometimes they are probably releasing and crying. And that happens, the very natural process, because you've stored so much physically. Just by simple movement, you are releasing the emotions which never got an out. So if a person is even choosing to come into yoga through the medium of yoga asanas, then also they start seeing that difference play about in their emotional health and mental health. And then when a person chooses to go to the subtler practices of pranayam, of dhyan, meditation, you start realizing that the association that we had with our thoughts, how we start to identify with our thoughts, starts dissolving. And of course, it's a constant process. It's easier said than done. But it's the practice or the consistency that you're choosing to put yourself through. And at the end of it, yoga ends up being a path of self-discovery. Through the studies of yoga, through the education, if you start to dive deeper into the concepts of it, the scriptures of it, you start realizing that simply by educating yourself better, by choosing knowledge is power, like I said earlier. So by choosing to educate yourself, a lot of misinformed concepts, conditionings of the past starts resolving only because now you know better. But while I'm saying all of this, it does not replace or take the place of modern psychotherapy, counseling. It's not trying to, and it isn't. Many times, I see students wanting to come and share their problems. And I do have to tell them time to time that, I'm happy that you think that you're comfortable to come and share with me. I understand here is a space which is safe. You're practicing with me, you feel comfortable, you're ready to be vulnerable. But at the same time, I'm not the professional who deals with therapy. I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist. So I have to remind them that here is a professional I can maybe suggest. But it should not be confused. Even as a yoga teacher, you're a guide, you're a medium to help people on the path. But I cannot also be your friend. I cannot also be your counselor. I cannot also be
Right.
your nutritionist. So that distinction must be made, even for the teacher, even for the practitioner.
So basically, it's a complementary practice to your conventional and your traditional therapy, which you need to definitely seek and take help from a professional. And this will just help you balance and calm your mind in a better way, right?
So you have to see both going very much hand in hand. I've had students who've I've had similar situations with, where they've continued the practice of yoga, not just physically, from the other aspects as well, choosing to even study and dive deeper into the subjects of yoga, how that has started to reshape their thinking and, say, the blockages that they held in their mind, their perspective started to shift, and at the same time undergoing counseling, psychotherapy as well. So how that created such a fine balance in their life. Now, a person who really wants to change will really see the benefit with this, where you can see how both complement, various aspects of your own being. With so many more dimensions, if you see. So much that is from the past that is held in. So having both go together hand in hand can work like magic.
Yeah, but there would also be times where people would have just started practicing yoga and doing the pranayams, the meditation, the asanas, and may not have felt the need to seek a professional therapist because maybe they just felt better by just practicing yoga.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you also see that? Like in your
totally,
practice?
because it also depends on the severity of, the situation or the case. If someone is really going through deep-rooted trauma, I'm not going to say that, hey, come to yoga, your trauma will resolve. I'm not here to mislead anybody.
Yeah.
It's just to understand that there are some things that need to be dealt with in a different manner. So if today we have professionals who are working with this, then you must, if you really require. Whereas if you just look at day-to-day life, day-to-day stresses, day-to-day, disturbances in the mind, that can very well be taken care of with your yoga practice. If I just share a little about my personal journey when I started off and the initial period when I, began practicing, when I was even in the yoga school for that matter, the first change I noticed was in my nervous system. And it was a combination of everything. Practicing on the mat, consciously breathing, eating right, being in that right environment, getting myself educated on the concepts and philosophy of yoga, that so many little things about me started to shift. And the first difference that I felt at a bodily level was my nervous system feeling calm. I was a person who was so used to constantly feeling the jitters, the contraction in the stomach, the tightness, just because of the fast-paced world around us. But the first change I noticed was a sense of calm, where the constant feeling of anxiety, which felt so familiar to me, that felt my normal. So the very first time in my life, I had this conversation with myself, I didn't even know what it is to not have that anxious feeling in my body. And immediately on knowing that, I went back to feeling anxious. Because
oh my God.
You choose the familiar, even if it's not good for you. So it took me a while to slowly accept that it is okay to feel not anxious.
But I think it also has to do a lot with activating your vagus nerve and training your vagus nerve, maybe tapping into it. When with constant practice of yoga, pranayam, meditation, you activate your vagus nerve more faster because you're now no more in the fight and flight mode. You're in the parasympathetic nervous system mode, and that helps you to feel calm. Like you said, the nervous system felt calmer.
Absolutely. That is the first difference. So when people constantly try to ask, yoga or gym or this or that, one, there's no comparison. Everything has its own place. They all can go hand in hand. But when you look at, the modalities and practices of yoga, the first difference you feel is to not be in that constant state of fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system, which again, the life around us is constantly bringing us into. Here, when you step on the mat, you're reconnecting with yourself in such a way that you realize it's okay to feel rested. It's okay to feel safe and comfortable inside of me. Your body becomes a safe space because your mind is not taking over you. So all of that starts shifting, which results in your vagus nerve getting stimulated, your parasympathetic nervous system being in power, where you're not feeling threatened. all the time. So that, as a result, will have a direct, impact on feeling anxious or otherwise, feeling stressed easily or not.
That also brings me to my next question. That is the gut health. Now, we all are roaming with terrible guts. We have like inflamed guts, and gut health and gut issues are really like an epidemic right now. And I feel a lot of it has to do with the way we think, with the way we, just live our life beyond what's on our plate. Of course, that has an impact on our gut, but how we think, how we choose to emote, how we choose to live our life, that has an impact on our gut. So what role does yoga play in improving our gut health, say liver health, hormonal health, all of this, which we are seeing so much these days being disrupted?
See, today it's even studies totally hold the fact that your gut is your second brain, right? So the gut brain axis has already been established. When you come to yoga, like I said, yoga is for the mind. When we look at even isolating, okay, yoga for gut health, at the end of it, you may try and tap into the gut at a physical level. You may do certain practices, breath practices, asana practices. Sure, they will help. But if you're not helping this part of yourself, then this will constantly be stimulated. I may do certain practices. In the moment, I may feel temporarily relieved. But at the same time, if I'm not, dissociating with my thoughts and constantly going back into the loop of thoughts which trouble me, staying and living in my brain, my headspace all the time, I know it's going to cause worry, it's going to cause anxiety, and that's directly going to impact my gut, because we know anxiety sits here. We know how that feels. So this axis is very real for all of us. We can always feel it. A sense of fear first comes in here. And so you may choose to work with various practices, but at the end of it, the focus should always rest on how you are empowering yourself, how you're empowering your mind. Are you being enslaved by your thoughts, or the thoughts are having power over you, or you are able to have control over them? So constantly having that awareness of what is my self-talk. And that's when a person chooses to go into yoga philosophy, chooses to study yoga, that's why I'm constantly bringing it up. Sure, you're looking at the mat practice. Sure, you're looking at everything else that is visible to the eye. But the journey really starts when you start studying yoga, because that's when you start knowing more about yourself. And that's when a lot of those hard-held concepts about ourselves, about life, and the way we look at things starts shattering. And that's when you start thinking freer. Your mind space, your perspective starts shifting. So as a result, while we're looking at yoga from the gut perspective, I would say to zoom out a little bit and understand it's the mind always. Your physical practices will definitely bring about a healthy nervous system. And that will help you with the gut health as well.
So if you have to name 3 practices or asanas or maybe 3 things that people can do every day to improve their gut health in terms of yoga, what would they be?
So one of the first things I would say would be, as soon as you finish your meal, to sit into such a simple posture known as Vajrasana. It's a kneeling posture. You can do it on the bed. You can do it on the floor. Of course, if you have knee issues, then you can just choose to sit on a chair with an upright spine. But Vajrasana by itself just allows the body to be in such a shape that it aids digestion very beautifully. So that would be one. The other would be, as soon as you wake up in the morning, to take a glass of warm water, and those who can, for whoever the body allows, to come into the deep squat or the posture known as Malasana. So Malasanas, you can have your warm water while you're in Malasana, or you can do one after the other. But just coming into the deep squat position really helps you excrete well. So it gets your bowels functioning. It gets your system started.
Okay.
Because it's such a common thing. You may have encountered that constipation is so common.
Absolutely.
Because evacuation doesn't happen. You are consuming, but the body is not releasing.
Yeah.
Right? So that is a big problem. Rather than what to eat, what not to eat, what to do, how to digest better. But to just start your day with an empty stomach is so important. To practice, even if a person is choosing to do yoga asanas in the morning, to practice on an empty stomach is very important.
Okay.
People don't think of it that way. You may just wake up, you're late for your class, you'll show up for your class. But it's really important to have that time in the morning to just have your senses adjust to the morning, to the daylight, Take some time, allow your nervous system to be at ease, not to constantly be in a rush. So have that glass of warm water, come sit in Malasan for a bit, enjoy a good release, and then move on with your
But
day.
is it a problem if someone consumes like a date or say a fruit before the practice?
No, ideally practice is empty stomach, but again, specific depends on person to person. If someone needs to, having a little nut, dry fruit or a little half a fruit is all right. But you don't want to be heavy on the stomach when you're practicing yoga. Yeah. And thirdly, I would say that breath plays a very important role. So even when you are, say, eating your food, finishing your food, just taking a few moments before or after your meal, say while you're sitting in Vajrasana after your meal or before you start, to just connect with your breath, because that brings your nervous system in such a relaxed state they can absorb the food really well. So something as simple as this, I wouldn't even want to go into, too many things.
Yeah.
This is just the
Yeah.
basics which can help you a lot.
I think this is simple and everyone can
Yeah.
begin implementing this like from tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, that's really simple and effective, I feel. Because I also tell my clients, I said, you need to sit before you eat. You need to take 10 deep breaths, like focus on your breath. Don't just sit on the table and start eating, because you're not allowing your nervous system to calm down and come in the rest and digest mode, where most of your digestion happens, absorption happens. And then, we complain about bloating. We're like, why am I feeling so bloated? Why is my tummy feeling so heavy? Why am I not able to pass my bowels every morning? So I think all of this has to do with how we treat ourselves during the day, and the practices that you have shared is so simple but so effective, because I've done it with you. I've done it myself and they really work.
Yeah. Because there's so many steps to digestion, because people think you eat, body does its job, but to be mindful in the process of consuming your food itself is a part of digesting well. Yeah.
Nishtha, I see this a lot in my daily practice, where I know these clients who come to me, they need to practice yoga just to calm themselves, because they are living a very busy life. They're hustling all the time. And what they'll end up doing is going to a gym and doing HIIT workouts and intense workouts to get the adrenaline rush. But clearly these are the people who need to do yoga, because that's what is going to help them balance it. And when I tell them, listen, you need to do yoga at least twice a week, for your body, to be flexible, to relax, to get your mind and body and breath in alignment. These are the people who land up telling me, I find yoga very boring, Neha. I can't do it. I can't get onto the mat. I just can't stay still. Yeah. What would you tell these kind of people?
Yeah, it's very common. That's true. Because I also see that around, of course, a lot. And like it said, right, what you run away from is what you need the most.
Yeah.
So like you said, they definitely need it a lot, but they'll choose the opposite end. So see, there's few ways in which I approach it. If you ask the yoga teacher and me, I'd be like, if you're not ready, please don't. You have to be ready. If you ask me to be your source of motivation, I cannot be, because it has to come from within. But that being said, I also see that sometimes you need to still be in search of the right teacher. The reason a person may find it boring is clearly because they've had some experience, and that experience hasn't paid off or hasn't worked for them. And sometimes you're in that phase of life or a certain headspace that you're not able to slow down. Because slowing down means what? The same thoughts that you are avoiding are coming back to you. Yeah. You're right? And you don't want to run away from them. You want to just allow life to take place. So there are people who are choosing maybe a faster way of working out, adrenaline rush, HIIT, because they want to be in that constant state of high. And yoga is bringing you back to your truth, your authenticity.
I think they're not ready to face that.
Correct. Yes. So very often it ends up being that, where those who tell me, the moment I sit, if I just sit for 30 seconds, I have too many thoughts coming in my head, and it scares me. My own mind scares me. And it's true. And I can't even tell them, hey, don't worry. It won't scare you. Because it will, because you're finally starting to befriend yourself. You're finally starting to look inward. And because you haven't done it in so long, it feels scary. But the moment you just allow yourself to drop your guards and accept that it's okay, it's just me. I have to learn to move inward. And it's not going to be all that scary. It's, I'm going to help myself connect better. It has to be a little bit of that for them to understand, to eventually make their way. But what I really feel, that sooner or later, the same people do find themselves in yoga.
Yes, it's happened with my
Yeah.
clients. But what you said is absolutely right. It has to come from within. But as a coach, it's my job to get them on the right path. And sometimes when they're reluctant and they're just very apprehensive to even try a new form, because in their head, they have this notion of yoga being so slow and so boring. Maybe it's not even the thoughts, or it's not even their own emotions coming up. It's just too boring for them as a form of an activity or as a form of workout, and they just want to feel the rush, because otherwise they feel they haven't done much.
Anything.
I haven't worked out. If I do
Yeah.
yoga, I feel I haven't worked out.
If I don't sweat, I haven't worked out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have had clients where I've pushed them a bit and said, listen, I just want you to give it a shot.
Yeah.
They've tried it,
Yeah.
and in like 2 months,
Yeah.
they've seen a big difference, and they said, now we are addicted to yoga.
Correct. Yeah.
We need it.
Yeah.
We want to do it because we feel different. We feel calmer. We feel relaxed. And something in us
It's shifted.
has shifted.
Yeah.
And that has happened with my clients.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to know, that just giving it a shot once or twice may not be enough. Do it for a month.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
know for yourself how yoga is helping you. How is it working for you? And for most people, I'm sure yoga is something that becomes a part of their life.
Yeah. I've seen many people who may have actively even chosen to come into yoga, and there may be a time when they completely get drifted, choose different things in life or whatever, or just, maybe they haven't been back to it. And it may be so that after very long months, years later, they reconnect, because once the seed is planted in you, it is meant to sprout. So that does happen, even if there are sometimes pauses in practice over months, over years. I see people having that inner calling of wanting to come back. And that is when I say that yoga is not just a form of exercise, because through the practice, even if it is just just one aspect that you are practicing, that is maybe asana, it does shift something in you. It does tweak something in you, whether it's a perspective shift or whether it's that feeling that you leave with after the practice, whether it's that inner connection that you feel, it stays with you, whatever it is. And sooner or later, you'll come back to it. Even the ones who don't, I would say they just need to give it another shot. Sometimes you just need a different setup, a different environment, a different studio, a different yoga teacher. Usually I feel that it's the teacher, the person who is, who's teaching you is gonna, and if you connect with them, that experience can change a lot. So if they find it boring, they find that they can't connect with it, you may just need a better teacher. You may just need someone who you can relate to. So that should be their seeking, I would say. Yeah.
There's also a myth around yoga, which is that yoga does not help you with weight loss or strength building. What do you have to say about that?
So if I have somebody coming to me saying, I want to start yoga because I want to lose weight, if you honestly ask me, I say that I'm not the place you need to come for. Because if you're choosing to come to yoga with a very result-oriented approach, I cannot help you. You have to be patient. You have to be consistent. And yoga is a way of life. It's a lifestyle. So if you think you're going to do a certain number of classes and it's going to help you lose weight, it doesn't work like that. It is having to put together various aspects in your life. The way you live your life, from the moment you wake up to what you put in your body, to the things you think, to the kind of work you're doing, everything is, the lifestyle you're choosing is, the yogic lifestyle. So you want to make more mindful choices. How can yoga help with weight loss, if you ask me? It may not work how it would be in a gym setup where you're working with calorie deficit or you're working with a set program. Here, your hormonal health starts improving. Your systems of the body, be it the respiratory system, the digestive system, they start getting positively impacted. As a result of which, you may start seeing the lot of, the imbalances in your body start getting corrected. And over a period of time, you may start seeing that the excess built up in your body in the form of, say, obesity or weight or fat starts dropping down. So it's a very long, natural process, but a natural process when the imbalances gradually start getting corrected. So it may not be ki 21 days mein itna kgs lose kiya. It doesn't work like that. But at the same time, if you stay with it, you choose a yogic path or a yogic lifestyle, it is bound to make a difference. When you ask me about strength, there are certain practices, such as when we look at Ashtanga Vinyasa or even the traditional Hatha way of practicing. It definitely builds a lot of strength, because when you have to either hold a posture for really long or certain practices that end up being physically challenging, when you give yourself some time, over a period of time, you definitely see how you're working with body weight. You're carrying your own body weight. You're pushing, the push strength really increases. Your core is strengthened a lot. So it definitely builds a lot of strength when you work in some specific physical asana practices. But yeah, the approach is not one dimensional.
What do you have to say about the 108 Surya Namaskars and, the race to complete it? And is it really necessary that you need to do 108, and does everyone have to do it? Is it for everyone?
No, it's not for everyone. If you ask me, I've never done it myself. And like many times, on like yoga day or whatever, you see people doing 108 Surya Namaskar as a marathon. You know? And that's not the approach of the practice. I would personally practice maybe 6 Surya Namaskars, 12 Surya Namaskars, and it has to be done slowly, mindfully, keeping in mind your breath, your intention, going through the 12 steps nicely, very mindfully. So that would be my approach. I do not subscribe to 108 Surya Namaskars.
How many are enough?
See, at the end of it, even 2 might be enough. If a person is just beginning, you can gradually build up, but the number doesn't matter. On a certain day you're practicing, say 6, you're practicing 4 or whatever it is. A number doesn't matter, and completing 108 doesn't make you a better practitioner. It may just feel like a personal feat for a person. But does it have to be done that way? No, not really. You can choose to do a more complete practice instead of doing 108. It may not even be healthy for everyone. Yeah. May be very aggravating.
Yeah, I remember when I joined yoga classes like many years back, when I was a complete beginner to yoga. They used to do 108 Surya Namaskar, and I used to find it so difficult. I used to be like, what is this? Why am I doing this? And just because everyone around me was doing it, I felt like it is the right thing to do. And why am I not able to do it? So there's something wrong in me. And literally after that, for 2 days, I would not be able to get up because my body would be so sore and so exhausted. And then eventually when I met practitioners like you who said that, it's really not something that one needs to do, that's when I realized, oh, okay, I was really doing it wrong then.
Yeah. Because at the end of it, when you say Surya Namaskar, you're tapping into the sun's energy. Now just imagine where you stay, what time of the day. You are, inculcating that extreme heat within the body. The practice of Surya Namaskar is heat generating. Now doing that over 108 rounds may not be something everybody needs to. And even if it's being done, there are again specifications to it. So to do it as something which is cardio, to do it as, power yoga. Do it as a marathon, something I just do not subscribe to. And I do not think it's healthy. Yeah.
So the sitting culture that we are in today, we are constantly sitting through the day. We aren't really getting up, walking too much, moving our body too much, especially for corporate employees or people who have desk jobs. How can they improve their posture, and how can yoga help them?
Yeah. So yeah, sitting is again becoming like an epidemic and is causing so many health issues. Something very basic I would suggest is to have a 30-minute or a 1-hour rule where you just get up, even if it's for 30 seconds. So if you sat for 30 minutes, you sat for an hour, taking that break, your body needs to be upright a little bit. So take a walk or just stand in place, working or taking a call. Walking in the corridor, walking in your office, you're at least getting some steps in. Finding a way, you can set an alarm on your phone. Even if 1 hour is too soon for you to get up, then a 2 hour, after 2 hours, I get up, take a loo break, or find a call. If you have meetings going on the phone, make sure you're walking and not sitting. So these are small ways in which you can, either set reminders to an alarm, find the time duration that works for you, take your meetings, your calls, while walking and not being in one position or not being sitting on the chair. That would be one. The second would be, if possible, find a buddy. Find a companion, your colleague in office, a work friend who can, help you do this. So you feel encouraged, when okay, you and I are going to watch out for each other. So you just are a little motivated, that person's waiting for you and vice versa. So you can take maybe a 5-minute break that you are post-lunch, after lunch, just stretching your joints a little bit, just relaxing your neck because you're sitting in front of the desk. Just basic eye exercises because you're constantly staring at the screen, your neck, your shoulders, your spine, just stretching upward in Tadasana, for example, are basic ways in which you can just create a certain sense of blood circulation, a movement of energy. So you're releasing that lethargy. So you find a buddy, a colleague, you you fix a time, that this time, whether it's tea break or whatever break in the office, you and I are going to just stretch for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So that kind of becomes helpful. And this is for the body. If I have to just say, like, experiencing mental fatigue, you've had a lot of work going on. Maybe if you find 5 minutes on your chair, you can practice something as simple as Bhramari or the humming bee breath. Because in that moment of doing the Bhramari, just 5 rounds, 10 rounds, if you're doing the humming sound, that allows your state of mind to be less cluttered. And it's something anyone can try. If you try Bhramari now, you'll realize your mind is not having an influx of thoughts. That's the power of that pranayam. So the humming sound just helps you to connect inward, relaxes your mind, helps you to once again have a calmer nervous system. So they're so simple, doable. It's just about prioritizing. If you want to, you can.
I think it's just about removing some time in your day and having those pockets of breaks in between your busy days so that you can get these practices in. And they're pretty quick. You can do them like literally in like 2-3 minutes. You don't even need more than that. But they can have a huge impact on our health.
Absolutely. The reason people suffer so much in the body and the mind is because today we don't have any gaps. Think about it. Back in the day, if you're traveling by road, by train, when we didn't have cell phones, we would make conversations.
Yes.
That would be so relaxing for the mind to just talk about the mundane or simply looking out of the window. Today, if you're in traffic, today you're traveling by train, either you've got AirPods, earphones, you're listening to music, or you're simply on your phone and scrolling. So we have completely lost out on the gaps in our day. The gaps which would allow us to feel bored. And in that boredom, we would find creativity. We don't have that. And hence the senses are so overstimulated. Think about it. You're bound to feel stress. You're bound to feel issues in your body and mind.
Yeah. That's so true, Nishtha. I mean, I call them ultradian rhythm breaks because that's what they're called. You need to take your 5 to 10 minute breaks every 90 to 120 minutes of working so that your brain can relax, your brain and body can detoxify, and that's called the active rest. And that's what we need in our day-to-day life to feel better. What are your top 3 tips for somebody who's just starting their yoga journey?
First would be, don't think too much. Just start. Even if you end up reaching the wrong class or do not connect with the teacher or don't think that style of practice is for you, it's okay. Let it lead you to something that works for you, because that's a process of filtration. So don't drop it there. Just simply start. Second, you may feel sometimes when you don't want to show up. So you've really got to be consistent. So consistency, in spite of lack of motivation, there may be days, but just showing up again and again and reminding yourself, I'm doing this for myself, I need to show up. And you'll realize how rewarding it is. And you can try and find that reward at the end of the class, because that feeling after your Shavasana, we all know how that feels, that feeling of bliss. So always remembering, oh, that is what I'm going for. The third would be, maybe again, as I spoke earlier, finding a person, a companion, a buddy, a friend who is also equally interested in self-care, somebody who's interested in health and wellness. So finding a friend who can help you and join you in the yoga class. So that way you're not demotivated. You're ready to go. You're looking forward to it. So these can be a few factors that you can, look into when you're beginning with yoga.
Lovely. What's the importance of Shavasana?
So as a teacher, I always tell students, no matter what, you're not leaving class without Shavasana. Because while Shavasana, if I even translate it, it's the corpse pose, and you simply think you're just dozing off and,
wasting time,
zoning out.
Yeah.
So there are 2 types of people. There are ones who think, it's a waste of time. I'm not doing anything. I'm not moving my body. I need to get on with my day. They need Shavasana the most. There are those who who find it hard to relax. Their mind is constantly playing. I see them fidgeting. Their body is restless. Their eyes are constantly blinking. They can't even close their eyes. They find it hard to close their eyes. And there's also those who zone off so much into it that they have drifted. They've slept off. But what is Shavasana? It's asking you to consciously relax. So one of the things that we do with Shavasana is body scan. So we work part by part from the feet up towards the head to relax every little tiny part of the body. And what's that doing? It's simply bringing your awareness inward. So using the body to bring your awareness inward. So you simply drop that effort to move into a state of effortlessness. And if we allow that to happen without drifting away in sleep, because if you've slept off, you've lost out on the awareness. So you're not conscious anymore. And if you're holding on, you're controlling, you're not letting yourself rest, again, you're resisting that rest. If you simply allow rest to take place, you'll realize that you are like a renewed person almost. You feel so rejuvenated. And you have kind of created a balance of yin and yang. You've done the physical practice. You work through the body, the heat, the movement, and now you end it with rest. So it's like a balm on everything. And that's when you leave class, you're not leaving, pumped with adrenaline. You've left with a very centered, balanced nervous system.
Okay. So it's important, right?
It's a non-negotiable.
Okay. But I think also everyone who's working out should do Shavasana. Like I've also told my clients, like when you work out and when you do HIIT, please do Shavasana before you leave because you need to calm your nerves.
Because your nerves are all over the place. So it's actually, and I see that in the gym as well, people are choosing to rest in Shavasana before they head home. Yeah. So it's a good thing. Yeah, totally.
Okay, now so we are going to quickly move on to our next segment, which is the rapid fire round, and I want you to make it fun and rapid.
Okay.
What's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
So in the recent past, the first thing that comes to my mind is I trekked up to Tapovan, which is above Gaumukh. When I had gone to Gangotri, I really did not think I had in me. I actually did not want to do it. It was 14,000 feet high, so it was really high. Temperature was very unsupportive, but it happened, and I think that was very exhilarating. So very adventurous for me.
Wow. Yoga on a beach, in the mountains, or in a studio? What's your dream setting?
Always the mountains.
Mountains. Wow. We've done it together twice, and it's been a great experience. What's the last book or movie that completely blew your mind?
It just continues to blow my mind. I would always go with The Power of Now. No matter how many times, and I've read it multiple times and I keep picking it up. It always has something new to offer. So that would be it. And a movie that blew my mind recently was The Substance. It's not for everyone. It's body horror. I don't know why I was watching it, but it really blew my mind.
Okay, in a good way or?
Mixed way.
Mixed way.
Yeah.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
Mamma Mia, here we go again. Okay.
What's the weirdest place you've ever rolled out your yoga mat?
I think for a shoot in the middle of a foresty area, we made it look really beautiful, but only I could see the garbage around. So it was a little weird, but we made it look aesthetic. So yeah, I think that was my only weird experience of practicing yoga somewhere.
Okay. What's the most challenging pose you've conquered so far?
Pinch Mayurasana or the forearm stand. It has been quite challenging for me, yeah.
Okay. What's the one food you can never say no to?
I think at the end of it, going back to your dal chawal would be one, like my home food. I can never say no. Even if I have to eat it 2-3 times in a day or, 3 days in a row, I definitely go back to dal chawal. Yeah.
Okay. What's your dream travel destination you haven't been to yet?
Many, very hard to pick, but currently on my mind is Turkey.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
To communicate with animals, to understand them and for them to understand me.
If you were not a yoga teacher, which other profession would you have pursued?
I was also studying for it, but I would have pursued psychology counseling. That could have been one. And the other would have been to be an animal behaviorist or trainer.
And with this, we've come to an end of our podcast today. And thank you so much for being here and doing this. I really wanted you to share all the yoga gyan with my viewers because it has completely changed my life and the way I perceive life, the way I perceive fitness, health, everything. Like for that matter, I was doing weight training for the whole of 2024 and I just realized in December, I'm like, no, I need to go back to yoga. I need to be on the mat because it was calling me. Like you rightly said, it calls you. It's like an inner calling. And you just feel so connected to yourself and to people around you when you're on the mat. And then you live life with those principles off the mat. So thank you for sharing everything that you've shared today.
Thank you, Neha, for having me. You've got a great platform here. And I'm very, very happy that I could get a chance to share all that I could about yoga. I'm still a learner. I'm still a practitioner. I still have so much to gain. But whatever I could share, I'm really happy to.
So on that note, as a token of gratitude, here's a small wellness hamper for you by Urban Platter.
Thank you.
Which has all the lovely, healthy goodies in it.
Of course, coming from you, it's got to be healthy. Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that you'll enjoy them.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you so much for tuning in this episode, and I hope you learned a lot about yoga just the way I did. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, but also please share it with everyone who you think will benefit from this information that we've shared today on our podcast.